Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, it was always nice to start with presentations by startups because they basically convey or disseminate good energy, positive vibes, and a sense of purposeful action. So in that sense, I appreciate the thought process behind starting the day's proceedings with two brief presentations by some young entrepreneurs trying to innovate their way out of problems, not only for the country, but also for the world at large. And energy, as we all know very well, is central to what we are trying to do in terms of dealing with climate change. And I'm happy to be back here. I was there last year as well, and I'm glad to see IVCA trying to deal with this subject and coming up with solutions which are quite relevant for India. If you take a look at some of the displays outside or the Green Village, you understand that this is not just purely about climate, it's about environment, it's about living a life which is in harmony with nature, consistent with our climate, with our food offerings, and paving the way for both healthy living and a healthy environment. So that is, I think it's a good initiative because it is important from our country's standpoint, where we are today, with the economy already sort of crossing the $4 trillion mark in the course of the current financial year. We were at $3.9 trillion at the end of March 2025. And geopolitics is in a huge state of flux. There is a lot of discontinuity. And economic growth is a very vital prerequisite, not only for delivering prosperity, but also maintain our standing and leverage in the global scheme of things. So I think whatever we do with respect to greening the economy, energy transition, environment, dealing with climate change and climate volatility have to be aligned with our priorities both in the near term and the medium term. As a country, we do take climate change seriously. We are well aware of the potential consequences of global warming and climate change, and more generally for agriculture, environment, and coastlines, etc. That is why we as a country, we are committed to achieving net zero by 2070. And that is one of the reasons why India revised its first nationally determined contributions on emission mitigation higher in 2022 after having first enunciated them in 2015. And we have met those goals we set for ourselves 5 years ahead of schedule. To tackle global warming, of course, we are committed to diversifying our energy sources and increasing the share of non-fossil fuels consistent with development and sustainability imperatives. We are committed to pursuing climate adaptation and energy demand management policies. In other words, I would like to quote, or maybe I'm paraphrasing the Nobel laureate Thomas Schelling, who said, there is a subtle difference between environment with growth taken into account versus growth with environment taken into account. And we as a country, given our current stage of development, should be pursuing the latter, growth with environment taken into account. Because we are a rapidly growing economy, and in today's world post-COVID, we are the only country that has managed to achieve 2 years of 9% plus real GDP growth rate in the last 4 years since COVID. And if we have to create 8 million jobs a year, at least for the next 10 to 15 years, economic growth is a necessary condition for many things, even for achieving environmental sustainability, ecological sustainability, and energy transition. Because as a country, if we have to rise from 3.9 trillion to meeting milestones along the way, 7, 10, 15, etc., on the way to 20, and possibly 30 in the next 25 years, our energy requirements are bound to rise because no country that is rich today has become one without consuming more energy. And most countries that committed to net zero by 2050 did so after making sure that their energy consumption had peaked because of their development status. And we are yet to reach peak energy because we are still a low middle income country. Therefore, ensuring the availability of affordable energy for all Indian households and businesses is the government's responsibility and priority. We do consistently seek to lower the energy intensity of economic growth, and that is where many of the startups and their products and innovations that will bring down the energy intensity of our growth are far more important than the ones that focus on energy transition or identifying renewable energy sources. I would focus on those innovations, ideas, and businesses that bring down the energy intensity of growth, because we need to address this problem much more from the demand side than from the supply side. And I'll come to the challenges that supply side of identifying renewable sources still continues to pose for many developed countries themselves. So we have to continue to seek to lower the energy intensity of our growth. And even then, because even by 2050, India's per capita energy consumption will be considerably lower than that of developed countries, both today and 25 years later. Therefore, we have to seek to align our climate and environment policies with our development priorities and not the other way around. And we should continue to do so in future. And why did I say that the focus on startups or innovations or ideas or financing will have to deal with demand side and not on supply side is two important things that happened in the course of 2025. And we need to take cognizance of what they mean for us. One is the April 28th blackout in Spain and Portugal. And the second development, also from Europe, is what is happening in the Netherlands. If some of you did not pay attention to the story that appeared in BBC website, bbc.com, sometime in October, as to what is happening in the Netherlands with respect to its massive commitment to raising the solar energy share of its overall energy generation mix. It is a salutary reading for all of us in this country, trying to chart and chalk out a path towards net zero by 2070. So how we get there is more important, even if all of us agree on the goal. Because what is happening in the Netherlands is that today, for example, they are using a famous film actress in the evenings in television, the government, to send out a message to the public at large to keep their energy consumption as minimal as possible between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. This is a rich country asking people to basically not use power between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. because they are having massive problems in managing the grid stability because of the intermittent nature of so much of solar energy flowing into the grid. And the grid operator CEO openly admits in that BBC article that when Paris Agreement happened in 2015, they were very enthusiastic and wanted to do their best to contribute to keeping the increase in temperature above pre-industrial levels to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. They wanted to do their best put their best foot forward, and they went headlong into raising the renewable energy share of the overall generation mix. What they did not do was to look at the preconditions that are required to do so. Because when we increase the renewable energy share in the overall energy mix, given their very low energy intensity, because they generate about 22% the yield is from the capacity, it is a low energy intensity source compared to fossil fuels. And therefore, what it does to grid stability, and therefore what it does to the volatility of power supply during peak demand, etc., were unknown. So we were dealing with unknown unknowns, and many people did not pay heed to the right sequencing. And in our country, the same mistake we should not repeat, because there are some advantages to being second movers, sometimes late mover advantage, because we can learn from the mistakes of others. And just last week, I wrote a fairly long piece, and I don't want to repeat what I said, but some important elements from that article which I wrote in the Mint newspaper, calling it the entropy trap, is something that I want to share with you. If advanced economies today are encountering fragility under rapid renewable energy deployment, the risks for developing countries are even greater. Their grids are weaker, fiscal space tighter, industrial systems more sparse sensitive, and our societies are vulnerable to shocks. In short, the current mitigation-first model in the world accelerates entropy in developing countries by increasing complexity without increasing the buffers needed to manage it. We should remember that recognizing the entropy trap, and those of you who are engineering students will understand the second law of thermodynamics, and that is where this concept of entropy comes. Recognizing the entropy trap does not mean abandoning ambition for energy transition. It means sequencing the transition coherently and designing it to reduce rather than amplify systemic fragility. Adaptation must come first, as most climate-related losses in developing countries stem from vulnerability rather than emissions. Our disclosure standards should be tailored to make sure that our regulated entities, households, businesses are in tune with what they are doing to mitigate the impact of climate change through adaptation measures. The word mitigate here is used to mitigate the effect of warming on your businesses, not just to focus on mitigating the emissions, which should be, by and large, the priority of developed nations, having emitted their way to developed status in the last 200 years. Adaptation, therefore, I reiterate, must come first, as most climate-related losses in developing countries stem from vulnerability rather than emission. Adaptation, which means coastal protection, heat resilience, water systems, climate-smart agriculture, preserving our water bodies, rainwater harvesting, and ensuring that we do whatever we can to augment the groundwater levels and use more of surface water. So whatever technological or innovation or entrepreneurial solutions we can come up in these areas will serve our development and growth priorities, and they will also reduce entropy by increasing stability and lowering risk. I'll conclude my speech by pointing to the book Unsettled by Steve, I'll just make sure I get his name properly spelled, Stephen Koonin of the Stanford University. He was in the Obama administration as the advisor for science in the Department of Energy, and he's still affiliated with Stanford University, Hoover Institution, and this book was published in 2021. When he was a student at Caltech University, which is very well known for technology, his most famous colleague, and I'm sure, or most famous professor rather, all of you may have heard this name, Professor Richard Feynman. He was one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. He was renowned for both creativity and the importance of his research. He was known for his irreverence, showmanship, and the ability to tell a good story. These were all his important strengths. Of course, he was, as most great intellectuals were, he was a character, but also a man of great intellectual substance. And in the 1974 Caltech commencement address, Richard Feynman, and I think you should look for it, gave a very famous address titled The Cargo Cult Science. Cargo Cult Science. The topic was that the rigor that scientists must adopt to avoid fooling not only themselves, but also others, and I will draw the conclusion to the IVCA conference before I conclude. And I quote, what Richard Feynman said in his commencement address, cargo cult science. The idea, he means the idea of scientists, is to try to give all of the information to help others to judge the value of their contribution. Not just the information that leads to judgment in one particular direction or another. And he is saying the easiest way to explain this idea is to contrast it, for example, with advertising. Last night I heard that Wesson oil, W-E-S-S-O-N, Wesson oil doesn't soak through food. That's true. It is not dishonest. But the thing I'm talking about is not just a matter of not being dishonest, it's a matter of scientific integrity, which is another level. The fact that should be added to that advertising statement is that no oil soaks through food if operated at a certain temperature. If operated at another temperature, they all will, including Wesson oil. So it's the implication which has been conveyed, not the fact which is true. And the difference is what we have to deal with. So what Wesson oil put out was, I finished the quote by Richard Feynman, so what Wesson oil put out was not dishonest, but it was not complete. And as we deal with the green energy, energy transition, and looking at what is happening in the world in artificial intelligence related investments and boom that is going on today, where as always when there is a boom, there are a lot of liberties taken with truth. And today when we are raising money or making new investment opportunities or claiming to contribute to energy transition, we should not only be correct with our facts, we should also be complete with our facts. And with that message, I thank IVCA for the opportunity given to me to share my thoughts with you once again. And I wish the deliberations all success. And let us make sure that India grows, generates both private and public sector surplus to be able to invest in sustainable energy transition, one that is both environmentally and economically sustainable. Thank you very much. Should I stay here?
A big thank you, Dr. Nageswaran, for the clear and grounded perspective